don't tell me the chute won't open or something, because it doesn't matter. I mean, it's going to happen, okay? It happens or it doesn't.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest segment of Real History. I am history professor Jared Frederick, and for this episode we have a real treat. We are going to be looking at the Tom Hanks, Ron Howard production of Apollo 13. And we're going to do something a little bit different for this episode. And I'm going to kind of act as our co-pilot for this episode, because we have a very special guest in the form of Mr. Don Freeburn, who has a very special connection to the story of this movie, the mission, and many other missions. So, Don, thanks for joining us, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm Don Freeburn, live in Patton, Pennsylvania now, and when I went to NASA, I was started out as a GS-7 aerospace technologist. And that was a general title for most everyone down there at NASA itself. Even though you might have been working on guidance, electrical, or even in the water systems and everything else, you're an aerospace technologist as a title. Oh, my specific job, I was assigned to the backup to the subsystem managers for the surface propulsion system engine system. And that was on the surface propulsion. There was a main engine that got you entered into the moon and out of the moon to return, and also mid-course corrections along the way. So that's how we supported the missions, and it didn't change through the whole Apollo, clear to Apollo 17, the last mission.
That's amazing.
And also the Sky Lab was similar too. Same building in that.
But we really look forward to gaining some of your knowledge and insider perspective as we watch Apollo 13. Let's go ahead and lift off.
Inspired by the late President Kennedy, in only 7 years, America has risen to the challenge of what he called the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked.
And of course, a lot of people might not realize that the first voice that we hear is Walter Cronkite, the iconic CBS News anchor. He's not really introduced here at the beginning, but for people who were alive at this time, it's probably one of the most recognizable voices in American society.
Jules Bergman was the ABC, and he was too frank, as again the wives said all the time.
It's like no other feeling in the world.
Little liquid propulsion. What's the big occasion?
Hey, how's it going over there in Mission Control?
He's supposed to be the playboy of the unmarried astronaut at that time.
And you said a lot of the astronauts had a playboy, cavalier demeanor, yes?
Well, the first 7 were notorious for that. Life magazine had a couple articles back then, and Time also. But he was a bachelor, and he mentioned his pad, his apartment.
Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon.
What were you doing during this moment when...
I was at home. During the most crucial times, that was not me in there, okay? I was back in my apartment, not getting to sleep if I could, knowing that this was going on. And coming, getting ready to come back in, in another 8 hours or so.
You're drunk, Level.
Yeah, I'm not used to the champagne.
And my wife and I lived in another subdivision on the west side of the NASA complex. The astronauts all lived on the east side for the most part, down by the bay. They had a couple of lakes down there too. A lot of them loved the water sports and that, and they were fancier homes down there too. I couldn't afford it. We couldn't afford that.
Apollo 8, we were so close.
And of course, they embarked on that journey around Christmas time in 1968. And
that was the first time Lovell, and Lovell's on that as a commander too.
Yeah.
This is the actual launch vehicle that will be taking Alan Shepard and his crew on the first leg of the Apollo 13 mission.
When are you going up again, Jim?
And, you know, there were so many tumultuous things that were happening in 1968. And I recall that somebody sent the Apollo 8 crew a telegram as they were coming home. And, you know, essentially said, you saved the year 1968 for us, because that's when they got that iconic moonshot photograph. Yeah, so iconic stuff.
And we did it that year because the information we had on the Russians, they may try it. And if they went around the moon like we did first time around, that's over 50% of the award, okay, the achievement. For the first to have astronauts around the moon. And so we jumped ahead in the program and sent them out there. It wasn't a landing, but successful though.
Barbara, maybe I don't understand, but you are not wearing that out in this neighborhood. That's the end of it. I don't want to hear it.
I'm not even wearing a bra. You can see everything.
Shut up!
They're actually acting like a sitcom family.
You know, I like these little kind of thematic elements thrown in here because, you know, at one point the daughter talks about, you know, the Beatles breaking up, you know, she's certainly dressing the part. And so you definitely get a sense from, like, the clothing, the material culture.
I think that's part of Ron Howard, okay? And this, I think he introduces those in there, whereas Lovell on that, we'll come back to the technical subjects and everything.
Yeah. And of course, Ron Howard himself was a product at this time. He was a well-known child TV actor at this moment.
Houston, we are
drifting down and away.
You want to just back off and take another run at this?
No, I got it. Let me just try and get her stable here.
I was mentioning too that we did a lot of simulations. We did the actual flights. So we were over in the mission evaluation room supporting the flight controllers as they simulated missions. The crew were in the simulator there going through all the checkouts to make sure all the lists of things they had to do were correct, not in, you know, out of order or anything else. And the rest of the subsystems that interfaced too were trying to say, whoop, you can't do that. My system, you can't do that with my system on, and that. They didn't know the full integration of all the electrical loads and other loads on the vehicle, and doing the switches and that. They're trying to figure out, could they even do the sequence? Can they even reach the switches in time for what they had for procedures? It was all astronaut to the switch, and the switch hardwired to the actuator.
You know, I think scenes like this, you know, it certainly demonstrates kind of the emotional toll that all of this work, all this preparation, and the journey itself had on astronauts' wives, their children. You know, there was a high divorce rate among Apollo astronauts. It was incredible pressure. You know, the nightmare sequence we just watched. I mean, did you ever feel any of that pressure as you were working in kind of these kind of volatile environments?
When you did have a problem, I knew a burn was coming up and that, and saying, well, I'm off, okay, I'm supposed to go home and sleep. How can you sleep when you think, well, the phone's going to ring and you're going to be pulled in there, and you better understand, you know, from the TV and that, what's going on.
Yeah.
So that you can appreciate, because you had no data otherwise coming in until somebody told you.
Yeah.
So I was looking at the kids' school schedule coming up.
I never liked the ride of those because my roommate had one, and you felt every concrete bump.
There's so many astronauts from so many of the missions had Corvettes, and there's group photos with
with the early models, and then the sharks here. That was accurate.
This scene also reminds me of a Ron Howard film, American Graffiti, that is full of drag races, and you can't help but think it's not a tip of the hat to one of his earlier films, perhaps.
I'm thinking about not going to the launch.
Huh. They wanted the astronauts' wives to be there at Mission Control too, and again, wanted to be with their kids and that at the TVs and that back home, but the press corps was, you know, again, we were in a period of time where we were in competition with the Russians, and it was PR.
Yeah.
And you everything was based on PR. So this is kind of accurate, I would think, okay, based on, she's saying, I want to be with the kids, and
yeah.
No, you got to be there in the mission control and that.
Fredo and I are going to be going over the lunar surface experiments tomorrow, and Ken's going to be back in the simulator. We're going to be going over the flight plan tonight as well.
Supposedly the crawler taking the whole system built up in the VAB, the vertical assembly building, and they took it out to the pads very slowly to the pad.
Did you ever get a close-up look at the crawler?
It was the early Apollo, I guess. I went down there to see the Cape because that's one of the things we're trying to integrate our system with the, there's not the plumb and the propellants and the helium at the very top of the stack. And so we had to know the people down there on the NASA side and the contractor side too. And so they understood the system. You know, you don't do this, you don't do that. And of course the contractors had the prime responsibility, but we were overseeing it. This is a thing we're buying for the government. And at KSC, the first time they gave me the introduction is taking me up on the elevator for the VAB, and then they put you in the front of the elevator and it opens up and you're there with the big gap in front of you. And for me, with bad depth perception, boy, that just, they got me. They knew it too. I felt, boy, I had to grab onto something. And,
left quite an impression, I imagine.
Yeah, you're not expecting it, and boy, they got me. But while I was down there, the only launch I ever saw was a Gemini flying out that particular day. And I saw a Gemini mission take off. But
which one?
I can't even remember which one now. Okay,
that's all right.
It was Gemini, and I was down there to get the Apollo, interface down there, and never was down there again because we were always back in at NASA at Houston and that, and.
I mean, I know it's their ass if I get sick up there, but I mean, Jesus!
He's totally, well, he flew again and others, so. But he really wanted to fly with this crew, I know that.
Yeah.
But he was a very good shuttle pilot then, as it turned out. He was on a number of flights for the shuttle.
This was my call.
Must have been a tough one.
And a fun little bit of trivia. The previous movie we did was Forrest Gump, another Tom Hanks film. And Gary Sinise, the actor, he and Tom Hanks were in 3 movies together in 5 years throughout the 1990s. The Green Mile was the third one. And so they are very much good cinematic partners.
Well, that's one of the things, like I said, with Tom Hanks did not come off as Lovell to me. I saw Tom Hanks there, but not.
Yeah. If you had a casting choice, who would you have picked to play Lovell?
Somebody like who played in the movie here, Krantz and that, okay?
Okay.
Okay, more rugged, because Tom Hanks is not rugged, okay? Not to me. But he's the same size as astronauts, all right? Okay, there's no doubt about it, but he just doesn't have that Lovell quality of a strong military type.
Light, we're coming in too shallow. I'm going to manual.
And here's, I was saying that why Lovell didn't want, because they were so compatible as a crew, they'd worked together so long and that they knew how to finish a sentence for each other. And when you're up there doing what you're doing there, you're expecting somebody else to be doing something.
Right.
Without telling them to do it, as a commander or something like that. And they just don't have the feel then. And I think they had about 7 days there, I guess 6 or 7 days to work together, and simulators and everything else. You have to depend upon each other, and right now He just doesn't have a fuel, and we could understand that he wouldn't have it.
Whoa, we can't go across that road. We don't want Daddy to get any of our germs and get sick in outer space, right?
Hey, boys.
And they're isolated from their families there, but they can see each other and say hi at the Cape. If they're going to land on the moon, we didn't know what was on the moon, and we didn't want to bring things back, nor did we want to leave anything there as far as bacteria, germs, and whatever.
Yeah, so Apollo 11, they quarantined them when they
but
got
again,
back.
also, you have a 7-day mission, or even longer than that in the later ones, that if you come down with something or other, you have no doctors. Like, yeah, you have doctors back in Houston, but you have not the medications and everything.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm gonna run a check on this thing. There, Roger. Okay, we have the oxygen deferred system check. We have the element restraint ring check.
A number of years ago, when I was working on a graduate school project, I got to see a number of the Apollo astronaut spacesuits in the Smithsonian. And this was before they built their new museum out near Dulles. But it was almost kind of eerie because they had it in, it looked like a morgue because they had them in these flat trays and in a shelving unit, and they pull open the drawers and there's tarps over the suits, and it looks like there's a whole bunch of bodies of astronauts in there. But that is how all of these suits are preserved, and it kind of poses a preservation challenge, because the question is, how do you save something in the long term that was only meant to be worn once, and it wasn't meant to be preserved in perpetuity. And so
the other thing too, those who went down on all three of them, by the time they got back with their suits, they had the dust all over their clothes, and the other astronauts up there that didn't go down got it also. Okay, and that's still on the suit when you come back.
Right.
So you have to isolate the suits and everything else like that, so that they don't contaminate other people in that. So that's why. That's another part of the preservation in that is to keep them away from people too.
Yep. I was about 8 years old when this movie came out, and it really popularized the idea of space travel among young people. And I remember, my second or third grade classroom, friends and I talking about this movie. And I even had a Tom Hanks Apollo 13 action figure. And so I think it speaks to the popularity of this movie at the time.
Other special guest,
yes, or another special co-host. Look what I found. I found my Jim Lovell Apollo 13 action figure I think I got this for my birthday when I was in third grade. And it actually looks a little bit like Tom Hanks. And after all of these years, amazingly, after I've dug him out of the attic, the only part of his equipment that is missing is his glove on his right hand. And so, like the real Jim Lovell, this guy survived a lot of adventures in his lifetime. So, there we go.
Roger that, Houston. Pad leader, what's your status?
We are go for launch.
So we had telephone lines, not individual going to individual, okay? We couldn't do that. The leader in the mission control room had a line going over to the others. So it was all controlled, because they wanted to keep any kind of chatter down. The flight controllers only talked to certain groups inside there, and then to the head one asked for in that, okay? So everything had to be controlled. Keep the chatter down. And
so, of course, one of the chief problems with the training for Apollo 1 was the communication breakdown that took place. What sort of changes occurred between the earliest missions and this mission to improve that sense of communication?
You got a lot of feed, and everybody wants to talk to everybody, and you can't do that. You have to have somebody saying no, and just making sure it's a minimum number of connections. was not wireless or anything else like that for the most part. So
We have liftoff.
And of course, the Saturn V rocket was highly reliable, and it never failed.
there was a couple problems with engines and that
Okay.
too. Yes, and unmanned, but they worked them out.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's amazing that we didn't have, and that's where the Russians had the problems with the
Right.
booster, and what we found out after the walls came down and we saw data and everything else, they blew up 3 boosters near the pad.
Yeah.
For a Saturn type,
and they lost a number of
and therefore
astronauts
they
in the
never did
process.
get to the moon then. But we thought they're going to try, to get to the moon before us and go around. That's why they jumped on Apollo 8 and pushed it forward.
Was there still a sense in 1969 or 1970 that the Russians could make it to the moon, or I don't know, what was the feeling on the ground?
We didn't hear, again, that was back again, it's all classified in that. We didn't have the intelligence, at least my level in that. Now maybe they did up at the top Apollo levels, talking to the president and the intelligence people and everything else. But by that time, they'd already taken satellite pictures of the Russian launch site and that, and they saw booster failures on the pad and blown up and everything else like that. So, but we had no knowledge of that, and the papers had no say in that until actually the walls came down there for the Soviet Union, and everybody got in there to grab data and that, and people were talking and that, and including NASA people getting in to find out what they were doing with the rocket systems and that. And
one of the interesting things about, because students who've watched this film, they ask, how did they make the actors float like this?
They were using, again, they used the C, I have to try to remember which vehicle it was, which plane it was, but again, they had a plane already that you used for stimulation
Right.
0 Gs. And take it up in the parabolic flight and then coming back down, it'd be 0 G for a couple minutes and that. Lower gravity, and they do all these things. And they said, I guess, the actors in that were all participators in that. I didn't hear, though, because that's going to make you sick. It made the astronauts sick when they did it the first times around, too. They didn't talk anything about that.
Yeah.
But, to me, I see that, and I can't even do air flights if I get sick. So I can understand that.
And
what they went through just to film.
Yeah, I know. It had to have been quite the feat.
100 feet.
Yeah, and I mean, the actors, they essentially went through like a grown-up version of space camp.
Yep.
To prepare for these roles. And Tom Hanks, in a number of his roles throughout his career, he's kind of taken that hands-on approach.
I don't know if he was isolated on an island or not, okay?
Yeah, maybe not for Castaway.
Yeah,
but for, Saving Private Ryan, he went out and lived with his squad for 2 weeks, so I think, he's a big fan of Apollo history and World War II history, and that's definitely reflected in a lot of his projects, and I think this was the beginning of that.
Okay, one of the first things we'd like to do is
Provide you with the appropriate background music.
hello world.
And here, the movie shows large area within the cockpit here in the Apollo thing. And you say, wow. But if you go to that capsule in town, you can see. And part of it's under the deck, okay, and everything else, but there's not that much room. And yet...
So the film embellished the size of the capsule?
I think they did, even though they said they tried to get the right dimensions in that.
Yeah.
It still appears larger than what was available.
Some of that was probably logistical, so they could get cameras and such to fit in there.
Yes, but they,
It's still pretty claustrophobic looking, though.
It demonstrates what they have to go through. I know it's,
right.
As you said, claustrophobic. Yep, close.
Now
And they complained afterwards for the next number of flights. They says, hey, we got many critical things going on this time. Sending something back PR-wise. That's the least we should be doing, okay? We can't do that this time. We have to get some other times than that. And of course, this was before the accidents and that, but still, it was not a period of time when, because they were thinking other things they had to do. But the PR people, they got to have it.
Do they know they're not in the air?
We'll tell them when they get back.
Was there a sense that by 1970 that public support and public interest was waning as
After
the film
the second shot,
indicated?
after the second, this one was, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
We heard, you know, and every flight became even more. And particularly for the next one saying, okay, we did this, how come we're, you know, trying to do that? We're going to end up the same thing again? Or a lot of pressure on the budgets and everything, so the top leaders of NASA and that really had a fight on their hand with many in Congress.
I've been accused of receiving...
This is all the channels we get, Mrs. Lovell.
It's that damn TV guide again.
Fun little bit of trivia. This is actually Ron Howard's mom.
Oh.
Yep.
For flight in outer space.
Fred Hayes, Renaissance man.
Looks like they have all the room in the world there.
Yeah. Yeah, and that the scene we just saw here, there was a pen light floating there, and for my graduate project, I got to examine and research and write about Michael Collins's pen light that he took on the Apollo 11 flight. And so I got to hold that in my hands, and that was such a treat. And every time I see that scene of the pen light,
where'd you get that?
It's at the Smithsonian.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
We got a couple of housekeeping procedures for you. We'd like you to roll right to 060 and know your rates.
Roger that. Rolling right. 0.
And again, the flight controllers are all at their desks and that. They have the same type of information we have. We don't have any different, okay? And the question is always, is your instrumentation really reading right, or is it the system wrong? Is the pressure really down, or did we lose a transistor in that?
And here's the big moment.
And since this wasn't my system, I had to go back into and do a little research on the failure reports and that, the post-flight reports, the and analysis and everything else like that of what happened and when it happened. And
so explain for our audience, what exactly did cause this?
This was a oxygen tank, one of a couple attached to the, there's oxygen and hydrogen tanks attached to fuel cells to produce electricity and water. And there was a number of problems in that oxygen tank was taken out of another vehicle and that had been already installed and pulled into this vehicle because they constantly were doing upgrades to systems and that throughout the whole mission or the whole program itself. And you would hear the word block 1 versus a block 2 versus a block 3 type thing. And there's a lot of problems with configurations and that, and people said, wait a minute, you know, this belongs really there, and you're dependent upon the contractor and their subcontractors. And the subcontractor evidently designed a lot of tanks, okay, and everything else like that, but this is again for space, for an application, and they had a number of errors in their tank design that could have been made better, looking out for single point failures and everything. And again, we have hard wires and stuff too.
Yeah.
And they had a stir and things in this particular oxygen tank to keep the systems under 0G in that, and cold liquids, and trying to stir it up in that to keep it even temperature throughout the tank. But they also had a problem when they took the oxygen tank from one vehicle to the next. They caught it on something and shuttered the whole thing. And normally the contractor doesn't give it that type of a vibration, but nobody picked that up as that big a problem, or they didn't want to bring it up, okay, during that time. Could have been an overnight thing or whatever when they did that. And that contributed to the fact that there was a problem with that tank that later on essentially had the electrical thing with the oxygen tank then, and boom.
Okay, listen up. Quiet down, people. Quiet down. Quiet down. Let's stay cool, people.
And here everybody's trying to look at what the data they do have, all right, because they can't see the system. They're seeing oxygen pressures jumping around. They're seeing electricity, because this is an electrical system, okay? The fuel cell is producing, batteries are backup. And a lot of hard wires and stuff, so. And he's saying, yep. He's saying, don't fuss. And they have no idea in the cockpit is what happened except for their gauges. And their gauges don't necessarily follow what data we have on the ground.
Mm-hmm. What have we got on the spacecraft that's good?
I'll get back to you, Gene.
And the astronauts can't talk to
How
straight
long?
to. They have to talk to an astronaut talking to others.
How long did this relay of information take, and what was the sort of delay in the verbal communication going back and forth?
Well, again, they don't talk to the astronauts unless they really have to talk, okay? And sometimes, I guess, even the book mentioned there too, astronauts asked a question, they didn't even come back because they're trying to figure out something rather than give them an inaccurate thing. So, so that's the flight director is the one with the astronaut down there in the flight control room talking, controls the flow of information. And he's not going to give them information that's not right. He's trying to avoid that. But he understands, again, the astronauts are doing it and they need information. Don't leave them isolated up there. So I wouldn't want that job ever, never. I mean, it takes somebody, I never heard whether or not he had ulcers or anything else like that, but I believe he probably did.
Wouldn't surprise me.
No way he has, he has a command of all this and the crew up there he's responsible for.
He's the bridge.
Yep.
Yeah, they heard me right. Tell them we think that's the only way they can stop the leak.
Did you know Gene Kranz or work with him at all?
I met him once or twice, yeah, but no, he's above my level. Okay,
yeah.
Going through two or three others, okay, so we got pulled over one time on one mission and they wanted to see our calculations and that, so that's about the only time I got to move in the back room of this building, the flight control, but.
We just lost the moon.
There it goes. Just lost the moon, he said.
You can only imagine what a heartbreaking moment for these guys.
Well, as soon as you know the system, we know they can't make it, okay? We know that from aborts and that, practice and everything else. That's an abort mode. You're not going to, go land on the moon. You can't say, well, I got a redundancy. I can back up with this if we work around it or something. Nope.
If this doesn't work, we're not going to have enough power left to get home.
And I would tend to think that, and I didn't get it out of the book either, that did the astronauts start thinking, well, let's see, we need oxygen, we need this, we need that. From the movie, it sounds like, yeah, that's going through their mind. If I was an astronaut at this time, I'm thinking, looking at dials and everything else, what else do I have to do? Not thinking philosophical, well, we're not going to make the landing now, and we're going to do...
Yeah.
These are,
undoubtedly dramatic
aircraft,
emphasis.
okay? They're going to be, could be working on some switches, whatever we have to work on, not the philosophical questions.
Houston, this is 13. Are you back with me now?
All the noise here, and it's, there's no noise.
No noise in space.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not Star Wars movie, okay? The only thing you hear is click, click, click inside, and that because of the mechanical, I don't know how they kept that in there.
Yeah.
I mean, they added that to
I
it.
recall more recent movies like Gravity, where it's kind of accurate in that sense. That there's no sound, you know. So yeah. But I suspect you're right that there's a hint of Star Wars in there, that there's an expectation among audiences that there's going to be sound.
Doing that, yeah, right.
Yeah.
They're doing for the general audience and that. So